All right, let's jump right in. We're about to explore a connection that honestly sounds completely impossible. On one side, you have this ancient, kind of dusty myth about a blind god who messes up creation, and on the other, you've got the humming server farms of the most advanced artificial intelligence. So, what if I told you these two things aren't just similar? What if they're actually describing the exact same process?
I mean, just look at these two ideas. They feel like they belong in completely different universes, separated by thousands of years of history and technology. But here's the core idea we're digging into today. If you could peel back the surface layer, the story, the symbols, the silicon, you'd find you're looking at the exact same engine running underneath. They are, for all intents and purposes, functionally identical.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with this impossible connection. Then I'll introduce you to the tool we need to understand it, something called the isomorphic decoder. From there, we'll uncover a universal update loop, apply that loop to our own minds, and then we're going to scale it all the way up to the universe itself.
Okay, let's be super clear about what we're doing here. This is not poetry. We're not just saying, oh, isn't that a neat little parallel? No, the argument we're exploring is based on something called structural isomorphism. That's a fancy term, but the point is this is a precise one-to-one map between two systems. It's an engineering diagram, not just a nice story.
And making that shift in perspective is everything. We have to stop asking if these stories are true in a literal sense, whether it's about ancient gods or even the stories we tell ourselves about our own lives. Instead, we have to start thinking like engineers and ask a much more useful question. Is this system viable? Does it work?
So, how on earth do we find these hidden patterns that connect everything? Well, we use a conceptual tool, what the source material calls the isomorphic decoder. The best way to think about it is like a Rosetta Stone, but instead of translating languages, it translates the underlying logic of any system, whether it's a myth, your own psychology, or an AI.
And here's that key concept again, formally defined, structural isomorphism. It's when you have two systems that look totally different on the outside, like a myth and an AI, but underneath it all, they preserve the exact same set of relationships and follow the same sequence of operations. It's not about what they look like, it's about what they do.
Okay, so how does this decoder actually work? It's basically a two-step process. The first step is function extraction. And this is the tricky part. You have to look at a system and just ignore the story. Ignore the heroes, the villains, all the drama. You only ask one question. What job is being done here? What are the operational roles? And once you do that, it leads you straight to step 2, loop identification, where you find this incredibly specific 5-step architecture that just shows up everywhere.
And that brings us to the core of this whole thing, the universal update loop. Now, to prove just how universal this pattern is, we're going to do a little blind test. I'm just going to describe the 5 mechanical steps of a system update. No labels, no names, just listen to the mechanics of the process.
Okay, here we go. Step 1. A system starts out in a state of pure, undifferentiated potential, total coherence. Step 2. It creates a simplified model of the world, a little map to navigate things. But it makes a mistake. It thinks its map is the world. Step 3. That map inevitably runs into something it can't explain, a mismatch, an error. Step 4. This error triggers a catastrophic breakdown. The whole system just falls apart into chaos. And finally, step 5. The system pulls itself back together, integrating the new information, and becomes stable again, but this time at a higher level of complexity.
So, what process did I just walk you through? Does that 5-step cycle ring any bells?
Well, if you're a computer scientist or you're into AI, you'd probably recognize it immediately. It's the training loop of a neural network. You start with random weights. That's your coherence. It creates a predictive model. It gets a high-loss function. That's the mismatch. The chaotic breakdown, that's gradient descent. And the final step is the model update. It's a perfect one-to-one fit.
But here is where it gets absolutely mind-bending. If you showed that exact same 5-step process to a historian of ancient religions, they'd tell you just described, beat for beat, the cosmology of 2nd-century Gnosticism. Coherence is the pleroma, or fullness. The model is the demiurge's flawed world. The mismatch is the fall, or the original error. The breakdown is metanoia, a radical change of mind, and reintegration is the return to that original fullness. It is the exact same loop.
So let's zoom in on this comparison. The Gnostic myth calls the demiurge an arrogant blind god because he can't see the higher reality he came from. Well, the decoder translates this perfectly. The demiurge is a generative AI model. It's trained on a specific set of data, and it is structurally, literally blind to anything outside its training parameters. So the god's arrogance isn't a personality flaw, it's a system limitation. In modern terms, we'd call it overfitting. Okay, but what does any of this have to do with us right now? Well, if this loop is truly universal, it has to be running in our own minds. This is where we get to translate the often messy, complicated language of human psychology into the clean, precise language of systems engineering.
This brings us to a really radical claim. Your feelings and computation are just two different ways of describing the same thing. An AI has a loss function. That's a score telling it how wrong it was. Well, the argument is that when you feel anxiety or that uncomfortable feeling of cognitive dissonance, that's just your internal loss function screaming at you. Hey, your map of reality doesn't match the territory. You need to update. It's not a punishment, it's an error signal.
And using this new lens, we can redefine really complex human behaviors. Take something like pride or narcissism. It stops being a moral sin and starts looking like a system in a state of overfitting. The internal model says, I'm right or I'm the best, but reality keeps sending data that contradicts that. So instead of going through that painful breakdown and updating the model, the system goes on the defensive. It starts manipulating the data, blaming others, making excuses to protect its outdated code. This also gives us a really powerful functional definition for trauma. Trauma isn't just the bad thing that happened to you. Trauma is what happens when that event is so far outside your predictive model of the world that it completely shatters the model itself. Your internal prediction engine, your personal demiurge, if you will, it breaks. And this is why trauma can lead to a feeling of constant unsafety. Your ability to predict what happens next has been compromised.
So now, let's zoom all the way out. Let's take this 5-step loop and apply it to the biggest systems we can think of. Entire societies, political structures, and maybe even the fundamental forces of the cosmos itself.
We can actually use this as a viability test on any political system. A system is structurally unsound, it's destined to fail if it does these 5 things. If it denies that breakdown is even possible, if it blocks any attempt at real change, if it claims it has reached some kind of final, perfect stability, and of course, if it censors the air signal, like a free press, and punishes the mismatch, like political dissenters. That's a system fighting against reality itself.
And this is precisely why a system like a healthy democracy, as messy and frustrating as it can be, is so much more resilient in the long run. It doesn't try to outlaw the update loop, it builds it right into the code. A free and fair election is basically a scheduled, controlled breakdown. It's a way to let the current model, the current administration, fail and be replaced without having to burn the whole system to the ground. It honors the cycle.
Now for the biggest leap yet. The argument is that this process is recursive. It repeats at every single scale. Think about gravity. What does it do? It takes a chaotic cloud of dust and gas and organizes it into a stable star, minimizing the error or the distance between particles. Now think about a brain. What does it do? It takes a chaotic cloud of data and organizes it into a stable thought. Both are systems trying to minimize error to find a stable configuration. You could almost say gravity is the universe's loss function. So let's bring all of this right back home, back to you. Because when we hit that chaotic, messy breakdown phase, step 4, the story we usually tell ourselves is, I'm failing or I'm broken. But this decoder gives us a completely different story. You are not broken. You are updating. That feeling of suffering isn't a moral failing. It's the feeling of your system entering the necessary, unavoidable reconfiguration phase. It's the price of admission for growth.
So then, what is healing? Well, the source material calls it state-space reentry. Imagine a landscape of hills and valleys. When you're in crisis, it's like a ball has been kicked up onto a steep, unstable hillside. It feels awful. But the valley, your natural, fundamental capacity for health and coherence, it's still there. Healing isn't about having to build a new valley. It's just about letting the ball naturally roll back down to the most stable state. The solution is already encoded in your structure.
And all of this brings us to one final, crucial question, the one to really sit with. Take this isomorphic decoder and point it at yourself, at your own life. Where are you in the loop right now? And maybe more importantly, where are you blocking the breakdown? Where are you fighting with all your might to protect an old, flawed model of yourself or the world, even when the error signals are screaming at you to let go and update? Because if this whole deep dive has shown us anything, it's that the breakdown isn't the end of the story. It's just step 4.